I'm here today to actually make a video for anybody who has purchased a candle from me or is going to purchase a candle in the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about how a candle burns and some safety tips. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about how a candle burns. So with coconut wax, candles are not going to reach a full melt pool in the first through 3, sometimes 4 burns. And so what a full melt pool looks like is, I'm going to show you here. I've got a couple candles that I've brought upstairs here into my YouTube studio. So this is one of the clear jars that I sell. And a full melt pool means basically that it burns the jar clear, the wax clear all the way down. Now these are my testers, so they have a bunch of labels on them, but you can see kind of here in the camera how there's really no residue on the edges of the jar. So that means that when this candle has burned, it's a full melt pool and there's nothing clinging to the sides, no wax remaining. And so this is desirable, especially with coconut waxes, starting at about halfway down the jar. When you get up here, there's still going to be some edges that are hanging around, like wax around the sides, and that's totally okay. The jar burns hotter as it gets farther down, and then those edges kind of melt off. I'll show you an example here of another one. So here is one of the white jars that I burn, and you can see here, let's focus, there we go. So kind of around the edges, you can see a little bit of hang up of wax. You can see how it's not flat all the way across, especially down here on this part down here. So what has happened is when the candle burns, it's not hot enough yet to reach the very edges of the jar. And as it progresses down, those edges should burn away. When they don't, people would consider that, when they don't burn all the way down, people would consider that tunneling. And that's when you kind of get a big circle with a lot of wax around the edges of your candle, but the circle burns all the way down. So you don't want that, right? You also don't want the jar so hot that it's like over 155 to 180 degrees is what we consider acceptable as candle makers is anything under 170, but we strive for like 130 to 140-ish. Towards the bottom. The top always burns cooler. The next one I'm going to show you is when a candle burns all the way down to the very base of the candle. There's something in there, the wicks, they have little wick tabs on them, and I thought I had a little wick tab with me here. Oh, I do. Okay. So you can see here that the jar burned from the top all the way down to the very bottom. There is like less than 1/8 of an inch left. It's like a 1/16 of an inch left. Typically, I always usually stop burning them when there's like 1/8 of an inch left if they don't go out on their own. But this one burned all the way down to the wick tabs. I'm going to show you what a wick tab is here. So this is the wick. And then if you can see it, I'm going to put this on my face here. I'm trying to like do it so that, there we go. You can see that little ledge there. That is the wick tab, and you don't want the wax to burn below that. So that's like a safety feature on wicks. Some wicks are flat, and then the candle would burn all the way down to the very bottom of the jar where we get really hot, and then you would risk whatever it's sitting on burning and maybe even leaving a burn mark, and that's super hazardous, right? Because that could catch on fire if your jar is too hot. So they've created those wick tabs to stop the wax from burning any lower than that, because the wick actually is done when it hits that wick tab, so there's nothing to ignite. It's just gone. And this candle is a good example of how it kind of stopped at the very bottom. And that's a good thing. We want it to stop. The next thing I have to show you is a tin. So this tin still has a little bit of hang up on the sides, if you can see it as we go all the way around here. A tiny bit of hang up on the edges, which is okay. As tins burn down, they are going to also burn all the way to the edge, but only after they get about halfway down as well. Now tins, you want to try and keep them under the temperature of about 120. You'll see that on the bottom of these are on my testers, but you have these little feet. And so the feet elevate it from your table or desk or wherever you've got your candle on, just a little bit to help reduce the heat from the container. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our actual wick. So when you have a wick, sometimes it's going to get super long. Some of the wicks are self-trimming and they don't always work. Some of them aren't self-trimming, but regardless, you don't want your wick to ever be longer than 1/4 of an inch about, because then sometimes the flames will get wild. They'll burn hot when they wouldn't if the wick was actually the right length. So we like to say trim your wick to about 1/4 of an inch, and you're not always going to have to do that. I have some wicks, they're called Aromalight wicks, and they are self-trimming, and they truly are. Every time I've done a test burn, they've self-trimmed. And this is a good example of a self-trimmed wick here. So it's about 1/4 of an, oh, it went blurry on us there. There we go. It's about 1/4 of an inch. And we don't want it much longer than that. Let me see if I can get it. There we go. That's a little bit better of an angle. So it's 1/4 of an inch tall, and we don't want it much longer than that. Otherwise, you risk the flame getting wild and things getting a little bit too hot. And so you may have to trim your wicks. Here's another example. Now this, in my opinion, is kind of right on the edge between, I'm going to do sideways here, see if you can see it, how tall it is in there. This is just a tiny bit over 1/4 of an inch, and I may trim this one down just a little bit. This is a tester jar, but it's pretty darn close to 1/4 of an inch, so no longer than that. Whether you're using single wicks or double wicks, it doesn't matter. Some other candle burning tips for you: burn away from kids, anything flammable like curtains, pets, anything that can catch flame. Drafts in a room can really affect how your candle burns. If there's like a draft blowing and swaying the flame, it could soot, it could smoke. So you want to avoid big drafts and even ceiling fans when you're burning a candle. Another tip is the first burn. We love to see you burn at least 2 hours, if not like 3-ish. The first time you burn a candle, maybe up to 4, but no longer than 4. Sometimes when you burn longer than 4, what happens is the wick gets super hot, it can get tall, the wax kind of melts down a little bit and the wick gets a little bit longer than it should, or there can be some types of carbon balls. Like sometimes you see these balls on the top of your wick, and those are called carbon balls. Those happen for a couple different reasons. Lots of times it's because there's a lot of fragrance oil being brought up through the wick, and the wick can't handle the amount, and so it creates this carbon ball. And those can fall off into your melt pool, or they can just spark big flames. It's like a ball of fire, I guess you could think about, on the end of your wick. And so those are not desirable. You want to cut those off if you see those after you've extinguished your candle, and then light it again. You want to make sure that ball is not there. Another thing is that we would like to see you blow out your candle if you see any soot, smoke, any of those things. If you start to see those things, check the drafts in your room, check for carbon balls, check to see how tall your wick is. If you see a lot of soot on the edge of the glass, it may be time to trim that wick. And if all of those things are looking good, call your manufacturer. So if you got the candle from me, call me. Don't call me, but email me or DM me on Instagram or Facebook and show me some pictures of the candle to see if we can determine why it's doing that, because not any of the candles that I sell should be smoking or sooting unless there's some external force that's causing that. So that's a little bit of wick safety, and we hope that your candles burn a long time, but if you do these things and you help your candle out, your candle should last. The tins last anywhere between 25 to 40-ish hours. These jars here, these big ones, they're going to burn like 60 to 80 depending on the conditions of the room. And these ones are like 40 to 60, 65 hours, something like that. So your candle should last a long time. And if you utilize the tips that I'm giving in this video, it will ensure that it does. So have a great day, everybody. If you like this video, thumbs up, like, subscribe to my channel, and take care. We'll see you on the next video.